Welcome everyone. This is one of our continuing series of webinars around hybrid workspace. In this session, we'll discuss multi-cloud and multi-cloud security posture management and how Microsoft Defender for Cloud fits into that. Matt, can you move the slide on? So I'm Andy Taylor. I'm the lead sales engineer at ITC Secure around everything to do with Microsoft Identity Security and Compliance. I'd like to also introduce my fellow presenter, Matt Fernandez. He's our head of cloud security. And we've also got some great representation from Microsoft here with Dan Dickinson, who's our Microsoft EMEA time zone lead for cybersecurity. So in this session, we will look at why we need a multi-cloud security posture and why in this complex world we live in, and as our infrastructures grow from being on-premise into multiple clouds, that ability to secure and manage them is getting much more and more complex. And how can we manage that? So Matt will show you how we can achieve this using Microsoft Defender for Cloud. And then Dan will spend some time near the end of the presentation of where Microsoft are taking the technologies. So just some housekeeping before we begin. If you need to ask any questions, please type a message to us and we'll attempt to answer as we go along, or we'll also have we can answer in the Q&A at the end. This is the 5th part of the series of events that we've done around hybrid working. All the other sessions have been recorded and are available for you to actually download and watch. So what I thought I'd just do was give you a brief introduction to who ITC is and what we do around security. So ITC, we're extremely capable in everything around the Microsoft security and identity product suites, along with all the cloud and the server aspects of the securities. So we've got a broad experience and broad scope of experience around things like enterprise mobility and security, so EMS, as you may know it as. We also provide services either via consultancy, and we also have managed services capabilities as well. So we can manage, we've got a managed SOC, so we've got a managed services offering to actually do a lot of these security offerings. But we've got security offerings, obviously, we're talking about today around Defender for Cloud, but around all the Microsoft Defender suites. And we have got lots of certified MS professionals, so we're up to about 40 plus certified MS professionals in our organization. And we've also got a lot of the Microsoft advanced skills as well. We're a Microsoft Gold partner, as you would expect. So before we jump into Matt's bit, let's just have a couple of minutes just talking about why are we doing these sorts of things, and we're just going to talk about the what we would call the attack kill chain. So, like I said, before we start talking about CSPM and Defender for Cloud, talk about how attackers try to get into your environments. Attackers will look to get into your environments any way that they can. What we need to do is block that attack no matter where that bad actors are trying to penetrate our systems. The attack could be coming direct from an email phish, or it could be a compromised account somewhere on our local systems. It could be from IoT, it could be any sorts of different environments that we've got. The key thing is we need to detect, assess, and then respond to that attack when and wherever it happens. So seeing a threat at each stage and responding to it. And then as we layer on the Microsoft products, we see how each starts to tackle the attack and responds to break down that violation. Like obviously today we're going to concentrate more around the Microsoft Defender for Cloud solutions and a couple of its main elements being Defender for Endpoint and Defender for Servers. So they come into that middle section down in the Defender for Cloud area. They both play a key part in detecting and responding to that attack. What you also notice, though, is Microsoft's invested a lot into the wider security problem. Although you see lots of products in this diagram, be them anything from Office 365, stopping our phishing attacks, to things like Defender for Cloud Apps, protecting our cloud applications and data. The main difference with Microsoft is that products are all integrated, and they feed intelligence data between each other to build up a much wider potential scope of what that bad actor could be using. It's rare an attacker would only try one area of vulnerability, so being able to see that wider picture is important. So you'll see Defender for suite of products is really, it's Microsoft XDR. This brings us to where we layer on Sentinel. So Sentinel is Microsoft's SIEM solution. Sentinel is used to start to give you that single pane of glass over all those Microsoft security solutions, along with third-party logs, APIs, and into things such as firewalls, network routers, and other security tools. So Sentinel combines that data sources using AI to bring together the information from things like Office 365, Defender for Cloud, we're going to talk about Azure Identity, and I can mention other third-party solutions to give you an easy view of an attack. So now I'll hand over to Matt, and he's going to actually delve into really what a cloud security posture management really means.
Hello, hello. Yes, so start off, CSPM, it's kind of being bandied around quite a lot at the moment. Cloud security posture management. Why exactly is this important to us? And fundamentally, if my slides will move along, it falls into a couple of categories. We've got our visibility and we've got our actions. And we know that as we're investing into cloud infrastructure and multiple environments, as people are using it, it can grow very rapidly and very organically, and it can be very difficult to have a 100% accurate view of everything that you see. It takes quite a lot of effort to go through and make sure that best practices are being followed, and that if someone is spinning up some infrastructure somewhere else, that you as central IT get oversight of that. There's also an element that time is precious. The people who are working in the security space, they're highly skilled individuals, and we're facing now a scenario where people are having to spend time going through and searching for things and checking out and looking at audit logs and actually manually diving into lots of individual portals to find things, which, let's face it, is not the most exciting IT security work in the world. So would we rather have these skilled workers doing these kind of fundamental tasks, or do we want them living the dream and out there stopping bad guys like in the movies with the screens and the hackers and stuff? I know which I would prefer to be doing. I'd rather leave the robots to do the bits that the robots can do, so that we can focus on the bits that the human brain is best at. So with our visibility, we're connecting everything together from our cloud estates. We're doing discovery, we're finding the things, and then we're alerting on potential gaps and areas of improvement within those. Microsoft Defender for Cloud, the way it splits these two is out of the box, we're getting enhanced visibility for lots and lots of things. And on top of that, then there's additional workloads that can be layered on top. So from our discovery, we're staying connected with the multi-cloud estate. With the alerting and monitoring, we're addressing issues quickly. We've got our real-time escalations, misconfigurations that can then be actioned very quickly. The remediations we're using against security standards, so our frameworks that we'll go into a little bit later, act as a very strong control for us to be able to quickly say, hey, this does not match, let's go make it match. And then our ongoing protection, including continuous deployments, automatic remediations, and things that the platform can manage for you so that you can see the results rather than having to go in and do all the effort yourselves. So with the multi-cloud, the intention of Microsoft Defender for Cloud is that it's not just a Microsoft thing. It is a cloud security posture management tool set that just happens to be hosted on the Azure platform. What that means is we can bring in information from lots of other clouds to provide our single pane of glass and a holistic view of compliance across all of our cloud estates. So whatever we connect, and we get a couple of these screenshots here, we get information from Azure, AWS, and Google Cloud. That will then drive down into specific recommendations where you can see which resources in which cloud don't meet specific standards. And then there's at a glance reporting and dashboarding that can be used both to report and to track changes over time. Now, out of the box, Defender for Cloud uses Azure Security Benchmark, which is Microsoft's blended standards, taking elements from CIS and NIST, a few other standards to, and some Azure specific ones, to give a very comprehensive view of the Azure estate. There's a couple of others, including ISO and PCI, that are also included out the box. But we can also see under this little compliance status screenshot, there's a lot of other frameworks that can be enabled. And these are enabled by deploying one of the premium workloads that comes with or can be accessed via Defender for Cloud. This is a relatively comprehensive list of right now what is available under the Defender for Cloud banner. And each of these is a workload underneath the main Defender for Cloud umbrella. And because Defender for Cloud uses the subscription and the consumption-based licensing model, you don't have to go out and buy lots of licenses for a specific thing. All of this will come under the Azure subscription spend. So if you spin up additional protections or additional workloads, you'll be charged for the amount of time you're using them. And then if they get removed or spun down, then you won't be charged for them. So it's a very dynamic scaling model to make sure that you're paying for the defense that you're using. When we combine that consumption-based licensing model with Azure management groups, or management groups, the equivalents within the other clouds, and our automatic provisioning, it means that you don't have to go hunting for new deployments and new resources that have been spun up. You can have confidence that if someone is creating something within a subscription or an account, it will pick up these policies, it will deploy the right protections to them, and you will get that reporting within minutes or hours. So one of the workloads that is key to this is I should say, Defender for Servers workload. And this is great because it includes a lot of stuff that is very useful. Baked in to Defender for Server, we've got Defender for Endpoint. And the name gets complicated. Defender for Endpoint for Server, part of Defender for Cloud, but that's a separate story. But basically what we get here is all of the technology that goes into the Defender for Endpoint user device-based protections and applies that then to our servers. We get the normal threat vulnerability management, all this kind of stuff. And one of the best parts of this, because it's included as part of the consumption model, you don't need to buy a separate standalone Defender for Endpoint license to cover these servers. You enable it through the policy, and then any machines that are spun up that are covered by that policy is automatically protected. It's wonderful. We also get vulnerability assessment baked in, and we get two options here. We have Microsoft's developed threat and vulnerability management tool, and we also have the option for a Qualys vulnerability scanner. And depending if people have specific requirements through their audit policies, these can be deployed to conform with that. Another great one to point out is the file integrity monitoring. What this is, and we'll gloss over the acronym being FIM, which is one from a long time ago for identity management. But this is a way of examining files, registries, application software, things within systems. And what it'll do is it'll take a snapshot of the current state, and every following scan from that, it does a comparison to see if any of that changes. So if any suspicious activity has happened that has changed any of the metadata or any of the files within an application, it will then flag that up to say, hey, changes have happened here. Is this correct? If not, let's roll back. So you get very, very rapid alerting then for potentially unwanted programs or something that might lead to a more serious threat down the road. Also like to point out that this, in the same vein as it not just being limited to Microsoft stuff, we have support here for not only Windows servers, but we also have Linux support as well. So what does this look like in the real world? We've actually been working with a customer at the moment to deploy all of this and then to use that as a tool to map out high priority findings, vulnerabilities, gaps in networks, all with a view to increasing security scores, making them more compliant with frameworks, and ultimately raising the security posture, reducing the attack surface, and allowing the IT staff to have a better night's sleep. So step one was to deploy Defender for Cloud. Over, I think it was 106, 110 subscriptions, and then 20 AWS accounts. We just turned it on everywhere for discovery. And what that did was bring back a host of information to show us what is important and what needs fixing. And a key example here, we've got some of the important ones highlighted in yellow. But in the first column, under some of the AWS controls, there's scenarios here where Elastic Block Storage snapshots aren't encrypted. We've got S3 buckets that don't force encryption. And we've also got S3 buckets that allow public access. Now, there might be reasons why each one of these taken in as a singular alert could be justified. But when you look at them all together, you're in a situation there where potentially unencrypted backups of block storage could be stored in publicly accessible buckets, which means if somebody happens to be scanning for public S3 buckets, they can just download an unencrypted copy of whatever's in that storage and do whatever they want with it. So by running these scans and showing all of this, we were able to not only identify that that was an issue, but actually see which resources it was, in which clouds, which then allowed really targeted and focused remediations against that. Now, that is not everything. There was a whole host, and I imagine that this will be very similar across most other environments. We'll note here that I'm not going to hang around to here too much. We can pause the video later if you want to, but there's a lot of different types of resources. There's a lot of different quantities of things as people have used and developed their own systems. And what we needed then to do was build the policies, build the simple frameworks so that these didn't have to be remediated manually by a person, that it could be handled by the automated systems, and then the reports could be assessed to make sure that those were actually taking place, and the humans could do the validation. So you may have heard Microsoft Secure Score. Over the years, it's been one of the key measurements or benchmarking tools within the Microsoft platform. The enhancements through this now means that we not only have the secure score, but we also have the regulatory standards assessments. So we've got the number of controls, and we have how compliant, or how many of those controls have been met by the platform. So this is just this is an idea of the improvements that we were able to do over, I think it was an 8-week period, to both remove devices that weren't needed, improve how healthy the actual system was, and then of course bring in the CIS benchmarking, so that the board members and the CISOs and stuff had a very clear metric and a very clear control that they could use to mark their improvement based on recommendations from the auditors. And while 32 to 47% might not look like a vast improvement overall, when it's broken down into the actual subscription levels or the business levels, so these were then management groups that can be chunked up so that you can see where the weak parts are in the business. And in black, we've got original or the final score that we were able to achieve within that short sprint, and then the percentage increase from that. So yes, okay, 32 to 47, but we've actually managed to increase some of the scores by nearly 60%, bringing these subscriptions to near compliance with those frameworks. So in the portal, real world, let's actually have a look at what it looks like. This is the busy portal. This is now showing all of our recommendations after we've deployed and how important they might be. So the one we're highlighting here is for vulnerability assessments, where you can see that 16 out of 19 of our VMs and servers don't have the vulnerability assessment tools deployed to them. And that is because the system doesn't know if, that it can't detect anything has been deployed through it, and it hasn't been told that something has been deployed separately. So we've got a choice now when we move forward. Because this is a framework compliance tool, there is a distinct possibility that you have separate tools, third-party tools that are nothing to do with this system, that solve some of those controls and to an adequate degree. The business is happy, we don't need anything changing. So we get the choice here. We can either, if we choose to use the deployments from the Microsoft toolsets, we can deploy our scanner to all those machines and we can set those policies up so that they run. Or we can add the business exemption in place. And we can say, okay, we are using an external Qualys scanner in this instance. We've got that deployed to everybody. It's going to go out to all of these subscriptions because they're all covered. But we're going to set a expiration date on this exemption. So in 6 months' time, somebody will have to come in, redo the assessment to make sure that that is still an applicable exemption. And then all of this then has the audit trail and is logged so that when the auditors come knocking, it's very easy to say, here's why we've exempted it, here's the why, here's our review cadence, and that ticks the box quite nicely. Ultimately, what this has led to is a journey. Now, I know we always love to say journeys, a transformation, if you will, where we benchmark where we are now and we work out what needs to happen to hit all of those targets. And each one of these will be small targeted packages that will either solve specific framework compliance issues, or might be for service consolidation for cost savings, or might be for expanded coverage to other clouds, such as, yes, okay, we're bringing in security data from AWS and GCP, but wouldn't it be great to extend our privileged access and our privileged identity controls so that Azure as a control plane can manage those privileged actions within those other clouds. And things like that can all be done and have all been planned for this customer as part of this discovery and this deployments. One final thing to mention as well is that the frameworks that are deployed, we've got lots of them out the box and lots of the standards that are baked in. But if there are specific needs and specific wants, when you reach a certain point and the business feels like they're ready, additional custom controls can actually be enabled. I think it's custom initiatives they're called, and ITC can help bring those all together so that you have a very bespoke framework that's highly targeted and applicable to business and industry and your specific audit requirements. So those all together basically bring you along the journey in quite a simple manner, from seeing everything, working out what needs to be done, building the journey for how that is to be achieved, and then actually deploying that in a way that is pertinent to the business. And now I'm going to hand off back to Andy, and he's going to tell me how to get started.
Thanks, Matt. So yeah, so how do we get started on this? So we just go to the next page. Microsoft's got a series of accelerator packages. So they're designed to be run by partners like ourselves, like ITC, and these workshops cover quite a lot of different areas inside the identity and security space. So the threat protection piece and the Sentinel piece would fit in nicely into what Matt's just been talking about on how we can actually discover what threats are happening in your environment, looking at what we can do with Defender for Cloud and other areas. These workshops tend to run over a couple of days, and we really implement a proof of concept in your environment and looking at the data that's coming out of your environment. So we're working with those real users, devices, data, servers, etc. Microsoft funds them, so they're free to yourselves, and they come with a full report at the end of recommendations and things else that you might want to do. So they're the things that Microsoft offer, but being ITC as well of what we can do, we've got a lot more work packages available as well. So we've got work packages around anything you can think of from a security standpoint. We've got identity security health checks. We've got the zero trust roadmaps. We've got how do we actually get smart around Sentinel and ingestion. A good one that obviously we've just been talking about is the multi-cloud framework compliance assessment. So these are bespoke, these are work packages that we've costed up and are available for us to run at a costed price to yourselves. So please reach out to us afterwards if you want us to talk you into more detail, talk more detail around this. So that's where we're at currently with what Defender for Cloud can do. So, and how we fit into that multi-cloud workspace. Now I'm just going to hand over to Dan, and Dan's going to actually talk to you a bit around where Microsoft's continually growing this. Where Microsoft works, they do things called sprints. So they have 2 sprints a year, and Dan's going to talk to you about what's happening in this Q1 and Q2 sprint phase. Over to you, Dan.
Thank you, Andy, and good afternoon, everyone. So first of all, I'd like to kind of give you an indicator of where Microsoft are going in terms of sense of direction and kind of some of the decisions we've made in terms of the strategy behind the investments we're making. But just a caveat, what I'm going to share today is that it is roadmap and it is subject to change based on plans and target dates. So it's not set in stone, but this is kind of the general direction of travel. And I'm going to share some of the up and coming public previews that I have either just launched or just about to launch that you should look out for and kind of take advantage of. So the kind of core investment areas for Microsoft in terms of when we think of Defender for Cloud, it's had a really interesting journey where it's evolved from Azure Security Insights. It became Azure Security Center, and now it's become Defender for Cloud. it's effectively kind of evolved from a kind of standalone product protecting Azure, and it's now protecting the end-to-end ecosystem of cloud platforms. And Mac did a really good job of explaining the importance of CSPM and CWPP in terms of how we need this single pane of glass, this single tool set, this single set of playbooks that effectively gives us that end-to-end support. So the majority of the investment is going into that contextual CSPM and CWPP to evolve it from just a kind of traditional offering to take advantage of cloud-first capabilities, such as threat-based intelligence, user entity-based analytics, and other kind of threat intelligence profiling, but also to look at how we can build on the existing multi-cloud support so that we can take advantage and strengthen Azure Security Center and Microsoft Defender for Cloud as a single tool set to be able to apply all the use cases against not just Azure, but AWS, GCP, and other on-premise resources where you might be using hypervisors or kind of traditional infrastructure. The second kind of key investment area for us in this area is information protection within the cloud resources. So Microsoft has a very strong story around zero trust and data governance when we're looking at traditional unstructured data. What we're doing here is we're looking at the data that lives in your data centers, your line of business applications, and we've got a heavy emphasis on the structured data, and it's how we start to bring that into the security center, Defense for Cloud kind of operational framework, so that we then start to be able to enable zero trust security controls, visibility, and observability around the kind of the crown jewels of the organization that we're trying to protect in terms of the information. Then we want to look at the kind of the breadth of the coverage. So we recognize that cloud is an evergreen model. New capabilities are being added all the time. The way cloud architecture is implemented and rolled out is evolving. We started off with virtual machines. We went to platform as a service. We're very much in terms of scale compute and containerization now with things like Kubernetes. The idea here is that as the cloud is evolving, we want to make sure that Security Center Defender for Cloud is capable of protecting those newer ways of working with feature parity to deal with all the indicators of compromise and attack that we'd be looking out for, and all the kind of automation and kind of protective capabilities that we'd be wanting from the platform. And then finally, the way of managing the cloud is starting to evolve. So we're moving from this kind of GUI-based provisioning or configuration where we're using the Azure portal or using dashboards to effectively configure services. That's still very much an important part, but automation is key. And we're seeing a lot of organizations moving to secure DevOps and infrastructure as a code. We're looking at serverless and API automated tasking and task sequencing within Azure and other cloud services. So we want to make sure that we have security front and center in terms of being able to understand what the automation is doing and understanding when the automation might be misbehaving or where it's potentially being compromised. So there's a lot of investment in terms of the growth and kind of evolution of Defender for Cloud in where we're taking it. Next slide, please. So what's coming kind of in the kind of interim future over the next couple of months? We've got a couple of really interesting public previews coming up. So we started off with Azure Arc and effectively some private and public preview capabilities for supporting multi-cloud. We're looking at evolving how we do this now to using the native support for the CSPM frameworks within GCP. We've already kind of launched this for AWS, but we're now adding effectively support for GCP in terms of being able to monitor, manage, maintain, and use Security Center and Defender for Cloud for all of those cloud workloads running outside of the Microsoft and the Azure clouds, now fully supporting Google. We're looking at expanding our database support. So going beyond the traditional workloads of things like SQL and supporting things like Cosmos DB with its own Defender. So it's effectively fine-tuned for the kind of security threats, analytics, and automation task sequencing that we would need for the Cosmos DB service. We're overhauling the security governance. So we're looking at incident lifecycle, we're looking at alerting, we're looking at security posture management, automation, remediation, task sequencing, change control tracking, and all the other kind of things that you would associate with the service. We're also looking at that in that specific instance of how we integrate with existing tooling you may be using today with things like ServiceNow. Matt's already touched on the vulnerability assessments that we've launched for native Windows, in addition to the Qualys third-party capability that we integrate with today. But we're expanding that vulnerability assessment to containers and kind of Windows-based imaging. So we have that end-to-end vulnerability assessment that surfaces through that single pane of glass, whether it be a virtual machine, whether it be a container machine, or whether it be the image that's going to provision one of those resources. We've got contextual CSPM, which is bringing in some of the integration from RiskIQ and CloudKnox and other threat intelligence sources. It's also taking in some of the learning we've got from Azure Sentinel. So effectively some of the visualizations, some of the way we present threat analyses and investigations. That's going to be coming very, very soon in terms of an overhaul of some of that kind of incident management and the kind of reporting and visualizations of them. We've got Defender capabilities for cloud workload protection. So we're effectively looking at the infrastructure of the code, how we trust the code, how we're making sure that the code doesn't behave, whether we're pulling it from a GitHub repository or a kind of storage account. The idea here is that we're looking at zero trust for the DevOps process in terms of, do we trust the code that's about to execute, and is it authenticated and coming from a verifiable source? The anti-malware for storage, we do have some AV capabilities for storage today, but we're effectively overhauling and enhancing our AV capabilities. Effectively, again, as attackers are improving their techniques or evolving the kind of tactics that they're using, we're effectively just making sure that our system there is bleeding edge to deal with the newer ways that attackers are starting to work, so that we're always providing that level of coverage, and we can cover some of the protections against malware kind of that's deeply embedded, moving more towards kind of the real-time visibility and limiting that blast radius so that we have automation controls, that it's not necessarily that once something's been uploaded, we're going to quarantine it. We're actually going to stop it from being uploaded in the first place, or we're going to have an automatic response like we do with the Windows XDR side that's going to intercept and then execute security playbooks off the back of it. And then we're going to take the vulnerability assessment capabilities that we currently run in Azure, and we're going to start extending that through to other cloud services via our ARC capability to cloud services like AWS. So you're going to start getting the native vulnerability assessments, the kind of security recommendations that you see today are going to have effectively a closer feature parity to what we're able to do with stuff running natively in Azure in terms of that vulnerability assessment and some of the security policy and control sets. Next slide, please. So starting with that CSPM and CWP capability for multi-cloud, Azure Arc is kind of the technology under the hood that's making this work. We're effectively working with native APIs so that we're not effectively having to deploy any special agents to be able to audit the cloud fabric services that's running on AWS or GCP. We're looking at leveraging the native security controls or augmenting them with Microsoft security controls, effectively all API driven. We have the capability that has gone GA for AWS using our native capability. We've very recently moving towards GA for the GCP cloud platform. And as you can see, we've made great progress in terms of some of the security frameworks that Matt showed a little bit earlier, in terms of things like CIS benchmarks and NIST frameworks, Azure security benchmarks. Those same security frameworks are now starting to become available across the other clouds outside of Microsoft, where we're able to do these assessments against things like an S3 storage account as opposed to a Azure storage account. So we're effectively applying the security context to the native cloud fabric service. Next slide, please. So this is then going into that security governance kind of overhaul piece I mentioned. This is simplifying the security operation. So rather than kind of just randomly generating alerts and generating false positives, we're focusing on ownership of when alerts are generated or incidents. The idea here is that we have a chain of accountability, we have SLAs, we have the ability to effectively make sure that we're performing the investigations and the appropriate activities in a very timely, efficient manner. We're looking at the false positive fine-tuning as well. So we look at things like multi-factor authentication for service accounts and other things that we may want to exclude from policies. Again, that fine-tuning is going to be there in terms of what we're doing in terms of refining the secure score or refining the kind of the list of recommendations that you're seeing and that are being surfaced through the portal. We're looking at the integration with the ITS systems. So yes, we're working on overhauling the incident management process on the native Microsoft Cloud platform, but we also recognize that customers have other processes of running this kind of incident management. They don't necessarily want to use the Microsoft ticketing system. So this is where we have capability today to integrate with a platform such as ServiceNow, but it's quite technically complex and documentation is quite scarce. It's kind of a workaround as opposed to an off-the-shelf documented best practice. And what we're doing is not just for ServiceNow, but for multiple different ITSM systems, we're working towards best practice guidance to make it easy to integrate with effectively a document that you could follow with a procedure to effectively switch on that integration. Next slide, please. This is calling out some of the things I was just covering there in terms of the multi-factor and the fine-tuning and that enhancement to the secure score over time. We are also making custom reporting a lot more powerful. So rather than using some of the off-the-shelf dashboards that we're providing through the Microsoft Defender for Cloud portal, we're taking the same approach that we've done with Microsoft Sentinel, in that we're using Azure workbooks so that you can use KQL queries, which is custom query language, and you can build custom dashboards with both visualizations, report packs, the tables with information. But the idea is a very rich kind of bespoke reporting system that we're working on within the Defender for Cloud product. We're also providing a number of starter templates as well. So it's not necessarily having to start from scratch. We're providing reports that you'll be able to clone, copy, and effectively edit and bespoke for your organizational needs. We're taking the incident management and the security controls and the recommendations so that when an alert is generated, we're starting to map that against things like the MITRE attack framework, the zero trust security models across the various different 7 pillars of zero trust, whether it be identity, endpoint, data, apps, infrastructure, etc. But the idea here is that when we go into a recommendation or a security alert, it's going to give us a lot more insight and kind of metadata that's going to help us understand what attack techniques are being used or where it doesn't necessarily align to our security control framework. And it's going to be a very visual way of understanding exactly what the problem is and why the alert has been generated. We're taking the Microsoft best practice, which is the Azure security benchmark, to monitor multi-cloud. So even though Matt covered things like the NIST framework or CIS benchmarks, the Azure Security Benchmark is what Microsoft security group effectively define as best practice to our customers. We're effectively helping define a best practice now for third-party clouds such as AWS and GCP, and the Defender for Cloud tool is going to effectively audit and draw attention to where those best practices are being met or where they're potentially being missed, and then giving you a remediation plan of how to go away, address that, and achieve that best practice. And then the other parts are around, again, adjusting and fine-tuning those secure score capabilities in terms of the, eliminating some of the noise and getting a really accurate secure score for your subscription level or your tenant level in terms of understanding where your risk appetite is and kind of area of exposure. Next slide, please. So contextual CSPM is taking some of the learnings we've got from Microsoft Sentinel, and this is effectively taking the incident graph, if you're familiar with it, where you can visualize exactly what's happening and how the different entities and the techniques are being interactive with. So if, for example, in the Sentinel world, we had an alert saying a user performed a mass download, on the initial inspection of just the alert, it could look like an insider who's downloading information that they shouldn't. When we apply contextual analysis to it and we look at cross-correlation of all the related alerts, all the related log files, and do some automatic correlation, we actually can identify via the incident graph in a visual picture and use case and storyboard of what actually happened. And it's not actually a user that's being a malicious insider. We can see a malicious payload being dropped, a machine being compromised, and ultimately the user's identity has been compromised. We're going to take the same concepts and build them into the resource graph in Microsoft Defender for Cloud. So when you're using the XDR capability, when you're looking at your highly attacked assets, when we're looking at the lateral movement graph, the exploit impact, it's going to be very visual, very easy to understand, and kind of very powerful in terms of mapping out that risk profile. Next slide, please. In terms of centralized threat protection for databases, I mentioned we're adding a Defender for Cosmos DB. We're effectively making it really easy and uniform in terms of how we apply those settings. So effectively, rather than having a different Defender plan for different types of database workload, we would effectively choose govern what type of databases could be provisioned in a cloud service using Azure Blueprint or policy. And then we would have an enforcement policy, either a subscription level or a tenant level, to say that all these different types of databases are protected by Cosmos, so by Defender. So we effectively have a database level policy as opposed to an individual workload policy. And it's a one-click enablement to effectively make sure that we're enabling that threat protection in a really efficient manner. We've overhauled, or in the process of overhauling, our anti-malware scanning engine. So a couple of reasons behind this, but effectively, the majority of our scanning is done at data at rest. So something gets uploaded, we scan it, we understand in blob storage or Azure file services, etc., that something's uploaded and that we might need to effectively isolate the file or raise a security alert. On our Defender side, in our Defender for Endpoint specifically, a couple of years ago, we bought a company called Hexadite. We converted that into something called the Automatic Investigation Response Service. And actually, when we see malicious files or payloads, and we're able to do things like file detonation or back out files or quarantine files or back out the changes that the files made when they executed payloads, it's those kind of use cases that we've learned from and that we effectively want to develop automation and playbooks around the malicious payloads that we could be seeing on the Azure side of things in terms of storage accounts. But we're also adding effectively as close to real time as we can get it in terms of the uploading of the file. So there's real time inline scanning, and also the ability to execute the playbook and actions of what that file is going to do. So think of this as conditional access for storage for files being uploaded, and that the files have to meet a set of criteria before we're going to allow being committed to the storage account. So effectively, it's giving us, again, a very strong security posture and guardrails around the storage account, and it's stopping that kind of avenue from being exploited. Next slide, please. So threat protection enhancements, we are, again, taking a lot of lessons learned, but there's a lot of kind of interesting things happening. We're, again, expanding the capabilities for servers. We're looking at aligning more closely with the SKUs and capabilities that we have for the endpoints and making it easier to align to the server operating systems. We're looking at some of the clever things we have with Azure Key Vault and applying it to the third-party kind of secret services such as Amazon Key Management Service and Google Secrets Key. The reason for this is when we're doing kind of threat profiling on Azure, we see something bad happening with Key Vault, we have the ability to trigger things like automatic key rotation, revoke certificates, those kind of things. So we can run user interface analytics to understand how keys are being used. What we want to do is apply the same capability to the other kind of cloud-based KMS services so that all clouds are protected. It's not just a thing we're doing exclusively to protect Microsoft. And again, on the Defender for Storage side, I covered some of the things we're doing there in terms of the overhauling of the malware engine. But again, there's a whole bunch of extra capability coming into that. and effectively that's making it really efficient and reducing the time to analyze and the kind of detection mean time to remediations, and expanding the coverage of where we would effectively have security visibility and observability layer. Again, covering the SQL and the database type for protections, we've added Cosmos DB. That doesn't mean to say that we're ignoring the existing security workloads. So again, we're overhauling and enhancing the Defender for SQL. We're effectively, again, consolidating, first of all, the management policy for databases, but we're also looking at how we can effectively scale that out for machines running in other clouds, such as AWS GCP SQL instance, how we would effectively introduce security default baselines and policies, and effectively increase the recommendations and the guidance that we're giving with the Defender piece. Again, we're kind of taking a capability, expanding it to the imaging in terms of the containers, the Kubernetes. We are looking at a whole host of different type of attack vectors and kill chains, but the idea is that we use a couple of different techniques on the Azure side with something called Sonar, where we're effectively doing detonation, we're profiling what the code's allowed to do before the code's allowed to execute. And again, we're effectively making a standard operating procedure that's an off-the-shelf capability within that DevOps process for containers and other kind of methodologies. Again, we've made a couple of big Microsoft acquisitions over the last 12 to 18 months. So we have RiskIQ, CloudKnox. We've made a lot of kind of progress with Microsoft Sentinel. Again, what we're doing here is we're making it easier to surface those capabilities. So the Microsoft native capabilities will be surfaced. Through third-party SIEMs, we are going to effectively, again, do work with the Azure Monitor service and effectively make it easier to export. But also, we have some fantastic insights and automation that we can push and leverage from the integration of RiskIQ and the privilege access management and permission creep index that we're going to start introducing with CloudKnox, so that we can cross-correlate that with the security controls within your baselines, policies, and everything else that we're applying. So jumping ahead now to information protection, the kind of final roadmap side of looking forward is, I mentioned at the beginning that there's a massive investment area for us around information and protecting the crown jewels. The way we're approaching that is, if you look at the journey we've been on for unstructured data, we had Microsoft Information Protection. That was an evolution of Azure Information Protection, Cloud App Security, Office 365, DLP, and a whole bunch of other capabilities. And that is surfaced up into the compliance.microsoft.com portal. So we have a helicopter view of dealing with unstructured data, regardless of what tool set is protecting it or analyzing it, or where the data may live. What we're doing in this instance is we're building on the foundational work done with Azure Purview, and we're bringing and surfacing Azure Purview information through the Azure Security Center, meaning we get a lot of information left that we're seeing information risk analysis within the information protection portal surfaced through the Microsoft Defender for Cloud, so that we can tie it into incidents. We can give you a security analyst view as opposed to a compliance officer view, and we're effectively giving you that end-to-end kind of centric view. So that's kind of a very quick run through in terms of where we are with roadmap and investment areas, but hopefully useful, and hopefully you agree that we're going in the right direction. Sorry. Yes, I've got one more slide. This is just covering again. We have a couple of private preview additional ATP products, but again, we are going to have a dedicated Defender for DevOps, a dedicated Defender for APIs, and this is addressing some of that infrastructure as a code capability. And then on the next final slide, we then have Defender for serverless and Defender for AI. So again, these are new private preview capabilities that we're working on. They're going to build on that functionality, but we're going to have more to share on this in the coming months. It's just to let you know that we're working on it and it will be coming soon. And with that, back over to ITC.
Thank you, Dan. So we're nearly upon time. If anybody's got any questions, you can unmute now. Otherwise, thank you for your time today. This recording will be available, so if you want to go back through any of it. Yeah, thank you very much for your time. Thanks.